theorist people that the reason we fought the euro, the reason we fight is to keep oil to keep the value of the dollar. It's literally been fought over to keep oil to the dollar system.
That's not a conspiracy. That's 100% correct. That's definitely what has happened. The only reason, do you really think that we would ever gotten involved in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia in the first place? Kuwait and Iraq in the first place, if it wasn't all that oil involved, and if it wouldn't have shut down business in the world? Everything's predicated on that oil and that petrodollar. That's a huge part of the way America generates its power worldwide and the way we project our power. And a lot of people don't even understand the difference, what the petrodollar even means and how oil is purchased and how powerful the commodity of oil truly is.
Okay. What else is on your radar?
We got that going on, and this is something that you know about probably a little bit better than me, but I see that in China that there's some big problems in their real estate market in China. They just keep building and building and building and building all these like empty cities, and eventually that's going to end and that bubble is going to break. And I have a bad feeling what that's going to do to the world's economy as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is obviously not financial advice. I mean, what I'm doing is diversifying.
The question is, does the collapse of their dollar, which ultimately that's what it'll lead to. Okay, so we had a Canadian bubble that for those of you living under a rock, you guys are all fairly familiar with the collapse of our real estate market, and it was based on letting people rent who should not have been able to. I'm sorry, people were allowed to buy who shouldn't have been allowed to buy. Right, that's obvious. They just saw a bubble happen in the Canadian market. Now the next proposed site, before it comes back to us again, and it is going to come back to us again without a conspiracy behind it, is China. China has been printing dollars, literally printing dollars for their own real estate market and to buy into our real estate market. One of the largest investors in this might be a mind-blowing fact for all of you listening. We are at the lowest point of owner-occupied home ownership in the history of real estate. I'll say that again. The lowest point in the history. It's like a 65-45 disparage. Like it's 65-35. Did I get the numbers right? 65-35. So 65% of all properties are non-owner occupied. They're owned by a third party. It's like some massive disparaging mathematical principle at the moment. And the reason I tell you all of that, the way China was able to do it was they are one of the largest investors into our property. They just print the money for it. They just print the money to build the houses. They just print money. And at some point, much like in the United States, if it's based on nothing, the dollar will ultimately collapse. And that's what you're talking about. Will it ultimately collapse? You have people that don't, it's a socialist society. I mean, you can't support the building. You're basically creating jobs by spending the money. It's a card game.
It's a Ponzi scheme.
It's a Ponzi scheme. Yeah, would be the best way to describe it. Yes.
Yep. And I see that as the biggest problem going forward, because you know what happens when people's economies start to collapse? Big time wars break out, and there's already regional conflicts going on in Southeast Asia. Vietnam is cozying up with America. Imagine after all these years, we had the first visit for a Secretary of State to go over there with Mattis. So he went over there the other day, Department of Defense, Secretary of Defense, to go over there since, Vietnam. So he went over there and he was, the Vietnam's really cozying up with America because they've already had border skirmishes with China throughout history. And they're very worried about the projection of China's power throughout Southeast Asia. And a lot of those countries are. And if you look at Japan even, they're rearming. They voted to pretty much rebuild their military, Lee, and that hasn't happened since World War II. As you know, they've been under America's sphere of protection. But we're at a point in time where we're very stretched as a nation. What do we have, 100 military bases throughout the world? It gets to a point where America can't protect everybody. We could help you out, but everybody needs to, start worrying about themselves. And Trump has started to do that a little bit with pulling back some of our funding at NATO. And for some of the people that aren't our allies, we need to start worrying about the dollar and making sure that the dollar is strong. And that needs to be a focus of administrations now and going forward. And I think a big boost to that, Lee, would be the second we start to see any sort of bubble. If we haven't started already, we dive right into infrastructure, because that puts everybody back to work.
Yeah, I would agree. And I don't know how ultimately it plays out. I just know that the dollar is a failed system here in the U.S., yes. And we've managed to keep it afloat because it is based on oil. Every time we try to base the dollar on another U.S. Commodity, i.e. the real estate market, it tends to collapse that market ultimately. For those of you who don't know, I highly, highly recommend watching, Zeitgeist? And Zeitgeist is a really good one. It explains how the dollar works. Basically, it's called the multiplication of money and how banks don't really have to keep money. It's how banks collapse and fail. It is a big reason behind what happened in 2008. And the real estate market ultimately every 10 years corrects itself. They just predicted it incorrectly, and they wanted to lend a lot of money because it helps the economy. So they made looser guidelines. So we spread out the dollar. The dollar's based on nothing, and we gave it to people who didn't have jobs. And it collapsed. Now you see it happen in Canada. Now you see it in Australia. Holy crap, it happened in Australia. It is not a sound strategy.
Yep, and Greece is in big trouble too. You see what's going on in Greece. They're you know what? Here's the thing, and I don't mean to harp on it, but it's very important that we understand in this country how lucky we are to have the capitalistic system that we have. And it's not perfect. It's definitely not perfect. Anytime people are slipping through the cracks, it's something that needs to be addressed. But if anybody listening to this show thinks that any system out there is better than ours, including Norway and Sweden and all these other countries, you really don't understand what's going on. You really truly don't understand what's going on in the world. You don't understand the true power of the free market. And I honestly almost feel sorry for people that are so wrapped in their echo chamber that they truly believe that capitalism's evil.
Yeah. I'm fascinated. It was bad enough that we sit in a society where somebody like Ron Paul gets up and he talks about inflation and deflation of the dollar, yet we watch it happening always.
Yeah,
at some point, somebody's got to get the balls and go, enough with the Fed, because it will. If the dollar ultimately collapses, I don't think people really grasp how fucked up it would get.
No, they don't understand. If you want to get a good idea of what's going on in modern times, just take a look at Venezuela. But if you really want to get a good glimpse into what the future would hold for us with big inflation, just Google Weimar Republic.
Right.
And just take a look. I mean, when you got to bring a wheelbarrow full of money to the store to get a loaf of bread, you're in big trouble, my friend.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem. And we're going into a period of time where, fortunately, whether or not you like our president or not, I don't really give two shits. He's trying to create jobs and infrastructure because it's good. I'm going to say this. I'm going to tell everybody the reason why he's doing it, and nobody will believe me. He's doing it because it's good business for him at the end of the day. He needs the dollar to be supported because he's in real estate. He's going to leave in a couple of years. He's not going to walk away from a place where he didn't create infrastructure behind it where the dollar devalues. He's not going to be the guy. Literally, we almost had a complete collapse of the dollar because of our financial system. And the only way out of it was exactly China's response, which was, we're just going to print more money, put it on the American people, and just pay to keep these places open, which is shocking that went down that way. And nobody said a word. Instead, we occupied and we blamed it all on Wall Street. No.
He sold us down the river.
Yeah. And it's so far down the river, I'll say it again. We are at the lowest point of home ownership, and here's why. We still have a 4% default rate in this country. That is double what it was prior to 2008. I'll say it again. We're still at what they deem in the banking world as a catastrophic default level. Lee, how do you know? I've been a 30-year banker. I'm that scumbag. I'm the scumbag here to help you. Understand that we already double the point. We're still at 4%. Put that into terms. 300,000 plus or minus people are failing to meet their obligations on their house. 85% of those people are not going to get a loan mod. They're not going to sue the banks. Okay, so all of you millennial trash, I don't know how you listen to this show in the first place, but any of you who actually believes, well, I'm going to sue the bank and I'm going to win. No, you're not. No, you're not. The banks always win. The banks always win. Always. I've been in
right.
banking for 30 years, and I'll tell you this. We always win. Okay? And the few cases where you do win, we sweep it so far under the rug, you're never going to be able to pull that as case law. So all 300,000 of those properties, that seems to be at a constant number. Let's just use a round figure. A city like San Francisco, that seems to be a healthy market, right, Bobby?
Oh, yeah, right.
Yet there are approximately 300 people in a city that is 7 miles square. One of the top real estate markets, double-digit appreciation. Now, on top of that, you have 150 people who lost their houses. That isn't going back to the general public for you or I or anybody else to buy. That's going to be sold to a company like Blackstone. And if you look at the reports that are out there, this just happened in Housing Wire. I'll give you guys some real inside dirt. Just now on Housing Wire, they found a Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae guy who was selling properties below their value out the back door. And if you think he was the only guy to ever he's just the one who got caught. Okay? Probably because he kept driving his Lamborghini to work. I'm telling you this as a banker. Nobody checks that shit. Okay? So you're selling off 100, 200 pieces of property in prime grade A real estate area to a company like Blackstone, giving them 20, 30, 40, 50 cents on the dollar. That's no longer part, and here's the game, everyone. That's no longer part of the inventory. It's not a resellable unit or widget, if you prefer that term. Now we have a supply and demand issue with houses right now, which is cranking the values up. So what did Trump do? He's going to benefit business. He put in the SALT tax program, right, which now affects prices on houses that are too high. He's slowing down buying. Nobody likes this, but he had to do it. He had to slow down the appreciation of real estate. It was rapidly getting out of control. All of the things that are going on in the current market, the supply and demand issues, are making people more pro-rental. I don't know if it's good business or bad business. I just know what the game is. And I try to tell this to everybody, especially people who are buying right now. Why the fuck would you buy right now? You are literally at the top of the market. Do I think it'll go higher? Yeah, I think it'll go higher. But it's completely out of control. We're now starting in my world, in the default world of real estate. We're now watching double-digit appreciation markets because those are going to be the first to bubble. And when this market collapses, don't expect bailouts this time. You're going to lose. You're going to see a massive company like Wells or Chase or B of A or Freddie or somebody's going to take it in the shorts this time around. And it's going to be because under the Obama administration, we created these trusts to sell these REOs to Wall Street investment companies to hold property like a commodity, right? Now, let me ask you a simple commodity question. If you held, well, you do, you own Bitcoin or gold or silver or anything else, right, Bobby? If you saw that your portfolio was starting to devalue on a decline of, say, 3 to 5% month over month, wouldn't you sell your commodity?
Yeah, panic would set in for me.
Yeah, right. And if somebody like Blackstone did that, the one thing that has helped our economy up to this point, which was a good plan, don't get me wrong, I commend everybody for the concept of what they did. They didn't give us a real bottom at the collapse, which should have happened about 5 years ago. We didn't.
Yep, we did. They didn't let us bottom out completely like we should have.
We should have gone even further into the toilet. We should still be digging our way out. Instead, we have only about 10% of the properties that are in a short sale situation. So they did a pretty good look from a economic stance. It was a pretty clever idea, in my humble opinion. And when you're talking about steering a massive ship like the real estate market, it doesn't break down to the 1.9 million realtors who rely on real estate. It doesn't matter about the million pocket investors who are trying to get real estate as part of their income. All of that stuff adds up. But when you start to shrink the supply and the demand, right? Now they've shrunk the supply, and so now they got to shrink the demand. How do you do it? Take the tax credit away.
Yep.
Now
exactly right.
It makes more sense, and I'll say it firsthand. I lease my house. It's not because I can't buy a house. It's because what's the benefit to me? I've never seen the benefit because I can add up what the cost of repairs is all by itself. Okay? If you're not even getting the tax credit now, it doesn't make sense.
and it gives you the ability if you get some